to everyone who has joined so far. We have a couple more minutes, so we'll just continue to let folks into the meeting for another couple minutes, and then we'll get started. Enjoy the music that Greg has playing in the meantime.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody can hear me all right.
So we're just letting a couple more people in that just joined. So let me just admit them. And then I'll just continue to let folks in as they go, but we can get started since we're right on time. And the music ended exactly at the right beat there.
Yep.
well designed.
For the folks on the call, on the presentation, that music was written by a British composer named William Walton, early 20th century. Well, actually, he lived to be in his 80s, 1983, he died. And it was written as part of a 1942 movie, but it ended up in part being in a rather decent movie, I thought, which I recommend to you all if you haven't already seen it, called simply The Battle of Britain. It came out in 1969. Apart from my, as I was saying to Jen, a somewhat cheesy romance line with Susanna York and the late Christopher Plummer, it's a pretty good movie, and it has some wonderful flying sequences, which are accompanied by Walton's music. So if you have a chance to see that or get the DVD or get it on Netflix, I'm not sure how you get it. I intend to watch it again because I haven't seen it since it came out. So let's start here. I have, again, for those of you who are maybe new to this, my name is Greig Seidor, and I'm a sort of an amateur fan of history, especially World War II history. And I'm particularly interested in this piece of history of the 1940 Battle of Britain. Last week, we discussed the development of the multifaceted British air defense system, all caps system, that was in place when the Battle of Britain commenced in June, some people say July, of 1940. I want to emphasize again that this system was a complex combination of critical elements, the absence of any major part of which would render the entire program a failure at achieving its goal of defending British airspace. In the case of the Battle of Britain, such a failure would likely have set the stage for a German invasion of Britain. But having a system is one thing, how well it works in reality is something else, and that's the story we'll cover today. In order to do this, we need to do a brief review of the events preceding the June-July 1940 beginning of the Battle of Britain. So quick summary of a lot of interesting stuff. War began, of course, September 1st, 1939. But after Germany and, of course, the Soviet Union's defeat of Poland that same month, it settled down until April of 1940, the so-called Sitzkrieg, or phony war, as it was known in Britain. After a quiet winter and early spring, Germany sprang into action, invading Norway and Denmark in April of 1940. And then came the main event, the attack on France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, which began on May 10th, 1940. The German plan was, what it bluntly, was brilliant. German infantry moved westward into the Netherlands and Belgium, in this area in here, causing the virtually all of the British forces and a significant number of French troops and equipment to move north and west to meet them. I'm sorry, north and east to meet them. This was followed by a massive German tank attack through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest that sped towards the Channel coast behind those Allied forces, cutting them off from their compatriots in the south. The result was, of course, a catastrophic Allied defeat and a headlong rush towards the Channel ports, particularly and especially Dunkirk, in their desperate attempt to escape the onrushing Germans. British and French efforts to stem the German tide were futile. For example, the British light bomber, the so-called Ferry Battle, which you see here, was used to bomb bridges across key French rivers. It failed completely. No bridges were destroyed, and most of the battles were shot down. RAF fighters in action were almost exclusively Hurricanes, one of the two planes I talked about last week. They hold their own against the German fighters. But the RAF is being bled white by the losses suffered in France to trying to halt the German advance. The German army, the Wehrmacht, seemed unstoppable. The cut-off British and French forces were pushed into Dunkirk. The British undertook a remarkable rescue, expecting to be able to recover only about 45,000 men in all. But due to some strange and German decisions and frankly blunders, eventually about 330,000 French and British were evacuated in late May to early June of 1940. This photo shows the results. The core of the British Army in France and Belgium is saved, along with many French troops who were sent back to France in what proved to be a fruitless effort to stem the German tide further south. But none, and I mean none, of its heavy equipment, tanks, trucks, artillery, machine guns, went with them. When those British forces returned home, wet and tired, there was even a severe shortage of rifles. The Royal Air Force had lost over 500 fighters in France trying to stem the onslaught of the German army. Facing defeat, the French were clamoring for more British air reinforcements. Hugh Dowding, the head of Fighter Command, the man we met last week, who was charged with the air defense of Britain itself, was frantic that too many British fighters had been lost in France to enable an effective defense of Great Britain, should one become necessary later, as it seemed increasingly likely. Here's what he told his superiors in mid-1940. I don't know whether you can read this, but the gist of it is that he's reminding his superiors that they had estimated that Britain needed 52 fighter squadrons to defend the country. And that estimate was based on the notion that they would be defending attacks from Germany, not from France. And that at the time of this letter, he had only 36 squadrons left. And he insisted that they tell him what was the absolute minimum number of squadrons that were needed to defend the country. And once that number was established, that they should make it absolutely clear to all Allied commanders, British and French, on the continent, that not a single plane more would be sent in the defense of France. This letter had its effect, and indeed, as a consequence, British planes no longer were transferred for operations in France. On the day that France actually surrendered, June 22nd, 1940, the RAF had only 331 Spitfires and Hurricanes, all totaled, left. France's defeat, of course, leads to the German occupation of the northern and western French coasts, including, of course, all of the Atlantic coast. Now, Churchill had become prime minister the day that the German attack began in May. The prior prime minister, Neville Chamberlain, had been fired, largely due to the conduct of the unsuccessful Norwegian campaign a couple of months earlier, or a month earlier. Churchill, at that time, was in charge of the British Navy, and frankly, he had some responsibility for that defeat in Norway. It was not clear he would become the prime minister. Another man, Lord Halifax, was preferred by Chamberlain, and some believed likely, had he become prime minister, would have eventually agreed to some sort of settlement with Germany. But that didn't happen. Hitler, on his part, did not want to continue the war with Britain, as he saw the British Empire of a bulwark of stability in the world and saw the British as sort of fellow Aryans. Were Britain to fall, British colonies would go to the United States and to Japan, not to Germany. He believed that the British would eventually recognize reality and come to some accommodation with Germany, which would thereby free Germany up to go in the direction of the Soviet Union, which, as Hitler had written in Mein Kampf, was his real goal, the need, as he sought, for new Lebensraum, living space, for Germany in the East. Elements of British leadership were willing to negotiate with Hitler to end the war, but not Churchill, who had been a ferocious opponent of Hitler going back to the mid-1930s. The Germans were celebrating their immense victory over Britain and France on the continent. Hitler toured Paris on June 25th, and later some of the battlefields in France where he had been a corporal during the First War. Then it was time to party. On July 19th, he promoted 12 German officers to the rank of field marshal. There seemed to be a little sense of urgency about getting on with the war. Now, some historians have speculated that an immediate German invasion in early June 1940 of Britain would have succeeded in the face of a British army largely devoid of equipment. German paratroopers seizing some airfields, with forces then being forwarded over by plane, a port captured, and so on. But the Germans never developed plans for such an attack, so obviously it never occurred. Following the astonishing defeat of the British and French in France, Germans had made no further plans for attacks on Great Britain. As I mentioned, Hitler expected that the British would come to their senses and negotiate a deal. Hitler had no interest in this, but he knew that Britain needed time to recover, as the British army had left Dunkirk with virtually no equipment, even rifles. On July 19th, trying to force the issue, Hitler made a peace offer in his speech to the Reichstag. That speech was greeted with the British equivalent of a Bronx cheer. 3 days earlier, Hitler, somewhat fearful of a defeat that might tarnish the reputation of the all-conquering German army, reluctantly directed that planning for an invasion of Great Britain be commenced. Both the German Navy and Army were very nervous about carrying out an invasion and insisted as a predicate that the German Luftwaffe neutralize the RAF so it could not interfere with vulnerable landing forces. The Luftwaffe dropped thousands of copies of Hitler's July 16th Reichstag speech over Britain, hoping to sway British public opinion into morale. Senior leadership of the Wehrmacht, the German army, were forced to come up with an invasion plan with little notice and no experience with amphibious landings. This is the plan they came up with: Operation Sea Lion, or in German, Seelöwe. It was something of an amateurish production, developed incredibly without consulting with the Luftwaffe. Just the Navy and the Army came up with this. The German Navy had been severely depleted by the April 1940 Norwegian campaign. For example, of the 20 destroyers in the German Navy, 10 of them had been sunk. So it was especially worried about taking on the Royal Navy, which doubtlessly would have made every effort to defeat the invasion at whatever cost. Now, the Wehrmacht did not have landing craft of the sort you may recall seeing the US forces used in the Pacific later during the war. They had river barges that were slow, not seaworthy for the rough seas of the English Channel. Clearly, it would be key to prevent the RAF from intervening. Leading the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was Hermann Goering, veteran pilot of World War I. Goering had persuaded Hitler to allow the Luftwaffe to wipe out the British and French forces at Dunkirk. But as I mentioned, the Luftwaffe had failed to prevent those 330,000 British and French troops from being evacuated. Now he welcomed the new challenge of destroying the RAF, believing it could be done quite quickly. Before the French even gave up in late June, the Luftwaffe began moving to 50 new air bases located in northern France and Belgium. The British air defense plan had anticipated that German bombers would have to attack from Germany proper, without fighters to protect them due to their shorter range. Now, those fighters and bombers are going to be located just across the English Channel, only 20 miles wide around Dover in Calais. The RAF was going to have to face both bombers and fighters. But the redeployment of the Luftwaffe to these new bases took some time. That, along with Hitler's hope that time would lead the British coming to their senses and striking some sort of a deal, gave the RAF something of a respite. A quick refresh. This is the map you saw, I think you saw last week. It indicates the bases for the two German fleets, if you will, Luftwaffe, 2 to the north and east and 3 to the south and west, as well as the 4 groups that, for the RAF Fighter Command, and of course the radar stations, the solid line being the chain home stations, which could pick up at higher altitudes, and the chain home low, the dotted line around the coast that could pick up lower altitude planes. Now, we need to do a little review of the airplanes involved. We talked extensively about the British planes last week. I'm not going to repeat that. This is the ME-109 or BF-109, a world-class machine, fast, heavily armed, 2 20-millimeter cannons and 2 machine guns, with a fuel-injected engine that is superior to the carburetor-equipped Merlin engine in British fighters. But like its British counterparts, it was saddled with limited range, enabling it, for example, to engage in combat over London for only 10 minutes before having to return to France to be refueled. The Luftwaffe had been aware of the need to improve the range of the ME-109, but it hadn't developed drop tanks. Those are the tanks you see in the lower picture here that would provide extra fuel to the point that the German fighter pilots were willing to use them. They didn't trust the tanks that existed. They were leaky. They were unarmored, which meant if they got hit in combat, they would ignite. So they simply weren't used. Indeed, many ME-109s would run out of fuel during the battle over the English Channel. German pilots used to joke ruefully about having Kanalkrankheit, channel sickness. Fortunately, the German Sea Rescue Service was quite effective in rescuing its pilots floating in the channel. The other fighter plane in the Luftwaffe was the fast and very heavily armed ME-110. 4 machine guns and 2 cannons in the nose and another machine gun firing to the rear. But as time proved, it was simply not agile enough to deal with the hurricane of the Spitfire in combat, especially when compared to the ME-109. Now, finally, there were 4 bombers in the German stable. I want you to note the 3 twin-engine bombers. As the Luftwaffe was reborn in the 1930s, its head, General Walter Wever, was a proponent of strategic bombing and supported efforts to build 4-engined bombers capable of carrying large bomb loads. But Wever died in a 1936 plane crash, and subsequent Luftwaffe leadership gave the project lukewarm support. As a result, the Luftwaffe had only bombers capable of carrying comparatively small bomb loads, 2,000 to 4,000 pounds at most. Worse yet, these planes were unable to defend themselves against attacks from fighters, both being too slow, 75 to 100 miles an hour slower than the Spitfire, and they lacked defensive firepower. The fourth plane in the lower left is the Ju-87 dive bomber. It was very successful in the role of ground attack support, but it ended up becoming cannon fodder, if you will, for British fighters during the Battle of Britain. It was underarmed, it was clumsy, and it was slow. Ultimately, it was withdrawn from combat during the course of the Battle of Britain fighting. Now, of course, as we discussed last week, the RAF has the Hurricane and Spitfire primarily to oppose the Luftwaffe. The numbers suggest that this was going to be a mismatch. The Germans have 2,300 planes, 1,000 of which are Me-109 fighters. Even with the respite since late June, the RAF still has less than 600 fighters. But the British have some key advantages. The Spitfire, for example, is unmatched in a turn, which is very useful in combat, as a tight turning radius would enable it to get behind the slower turning Messerschmitt, and therefore in a position to shoot it down. The air combat is largely over British soil, or actually English soil. A shot down German airman becomes a prisoner, while a British pilot forced to bail out can fly again if he's not hurt. And the hard lessons of May and June of 1940 have taught the British better fighter tactics. They've lost a lot of good flyers, but the survivors know how to fight better. We'll talk a little bit about fighter tactics in a moment. These lessons have led to calibrating the machine guns, the fire of the machine guns on British fighters to converge at 250 yards, not the 650 yards that was ineffective in being used at the beginning of the war. At the speed of bombers and the velocity of the British fighters' guns, shooting at 250 yards means the target has moved about 120 feet in the time it takes the bullets to arrive. So pilots need to lead with their guns, just as a hunter has to lead when seeking to hit his or her prey. This is known as deflection gunnery. And of course, if you're attacking a German bomber, approaching to 250 yards of your target means enemy defensive fire may be more effective as well. The RAF has pilots coming in literally from all over the world to join fighter command. 145 of them are from Poland alone, like these men. They've had a circuitous journey. After Poland fell, they escaped to Romania and then to France. And then from France, they escaped to England. Poles were ferocious pilots who obviously had a score to settle with the Germans. They were also extremely well trained. I'll give you an example of this. There was a competition run in 1941, in a competition for accuracy in firing. All the RAF fighter command squadrons were allowed to participate. The first and second ranking squadrons were Polish pilots. The third place was a British squadron with less than half the score of the two Polish squadrons. The problem for the Poles was they didn't speak English by and large. And that's obviously a problem when you're trying to be directed by English-speaking fighter command sector commanders. And there was also, frankly, just an out-and-out misperception of how good they were by senior RAF leaders. This chart will give you some idea of the wide array of nations and locations contributing to Britain's defense. Note the 9 from the United States. Of course, the 145 from Poland. Even Czechoslovakia contributed 88. Here are 3 of the guys from the US. Andy Mammadov, the guy with the mustache. Shorty Keogh, who was apparently the shortest pilot in the entire RAF. In order to fly, they put 2 cushions under him to get him up high enough. And the guy on the right is Red Tobin. Technically speaking, it was illegal at this point for Americans to get involved in the war as combatants. They did it anyway. All 3 of these guys sadly died in 1941 as part of the RAF. One more guy, very famous at the time, a guy named Billy Fisk. He was killed in August of 1940. He was the first US citizen. He was flying with a interesting squadron as part of the RAF, the 601 squadron, known as the Millionaires. They were one of these auxiliary Air Force squadrons that was apparently composed of guys who were very rich. The parking lot for the squadron, the airfield, was loaded with all kinds of high-end British cars. In fact, they were so rich that they bought their own gas station to make sure they had fuel. Fisk was an amazing guy. He won the gold medal in the 1928 and 1932 Olympics, driving the bobsled. You can see at the lower right. Now, from February to August of 1940, manufacturing of British fighters increased more than threefold to almost 500 aircraft a month. In fact, the RAF never really lacked for planes themselves throughout the Battle of Britain. And while many contributed to this manufacturing success, the principal actor was the man on the right in this picture, Max Aitken, known as Lord Beaverbrook, here with his son, who was a fighter pilot for the RAF. He was the guy that was appointed by Churchill to be Minister of Aircraft Production, a new post. He had actually was Canadian and had extensive British press interests. During the Battle of Britain, British production of fighter planes was twice that of Germany. British intelligence overestimated German aircraft production during the war, which acted as a spur to the increase of British manufacturing of aircraft. In contrast, German intelligence officers consistently underestimated British fighter plane production capability. Now, one of the steps taken by the British government in the 1930s to aid in British rearmament was to create so-called shadow factories, plants built near civilian manufacturing locations across Britain, which could be used to begin military production quickly. The idea was that the skills and people used to build civilian goods, for example, cars and trucks, could quickly be converted to constructing military equipment, for example, aircraft. This picture shows the factory floor for the Spitfire near Castle Bromwich in the Birmingham area of central England. This is where Jaguar built its civilian cars. There were dozens of shadow locations throughout Britain used to build different kinds of military equipment, not just aircraft. The dispersal of such manufacturing sites made it more difficult for the Luftwaffe to knock out British production capability. And a few other things that the RAF has. Since its planes are vulnerable to being destroyed on the ground, they need to be turned around when they land very quickly. Fortunately, the RAF support crews are very efficient at being able to rearm and refuel fighters. 10 minutes, turn them around for the 12 planes in a squadron. And British RAF repair crews do remarkable work. From July through December of 1940, almost 4,200 Hurricanes and Spitfires are repaired. Indeed, more than the new planes being manufactured over that same period. This gives you an example. Look at the Hurricane at the top. I don't know how they fixed that, but they did. And the plane at the bottom is after its repair. RAF intelligence officers are sent to examine every single wrecked Luftwaffe plane that crashes in Britain. Now, it's beyond the scope of this talk, but those inspections proved to be very helpful in dealing with German night bombing later in the war. This is an Enigma machine. Some of you may know that it was used by the German military to send coded messages. The British, of course, had developed the ability to decipher Enigma sent messages. Now, this ability didn't help the RAF in dealing with most specific German attacks, but it did give useful general information to Dowding and other senior RAF leadership, both about the Luftwaffe's strength and its overall goals and intentions. And of course, the Luftwaffe itself has a few things going its way. It has very experienced pilots and crew, many of whom fought in the Spanish Civil War as part of the Condor Legion from 1936 to 1939, and later, of course, in Poland and then France. And as we've discussed last week, being on the offense, the Luftwaffe is able to pick its targets and make the British react to its moves. And the British aren't just battling the Germans, they are also having to fight Italy in the Mediterranean. Italy's on the offensive. So during the battle, the RAF has to send 161 fighters, including 72 of those precious Hurricanes, to the Middle East. Also, because most Luftwaffe bases are in France, German planes will be flying out of the south towards England as they approach it. This gives the German fighter pilots a major fighting advantage. Their attacks will be out of the sun. The sun will be behind them in the south. And that makes it difficult for RAF flyers to pick them out in the sky before it's too late. Finally, German fighter tactics are considerably superior to those of the RAF, although, as I said, the RAF got better. The RAF had trained its fighter pilots to tackle unescorted enemy bombers with specific attacking formations, all centered on the so-called V or Vic formation, a leader and two wingmen. These tactics were wholly unsuited to combat with Luftwaffe fighters, as only the leader could look for enemy planes. The two wingmen were too engaged in keeping formation to be able to look around themselves. On the other hand, going back to their experience in Spain in 36 to 39, the Germans had come up with the Schwarm, a pair of mutually supporting fighter planes with two leaders and two wingmen. Eventually, the British got better, but at the beginning, it was tough on them, and the Germans were, particularly the German fighter pilots, were dismissive of the British using these V or Vic formation tactics. Last week, we met the leadership of RAF Fighter Command. Here are the two leaders of the Luftwaffe charged with eliminating the RAF's ability to defend against the German invasion. Albert Kesselring, the man on the right, headed Luftwaffe 2 to the north and east, while Hugo Sparrow oversaw Luftwaffe 3 further south and west. Unlike Dowding, whose sole responsibility was fighter command, these two men ran all aspects of the German attack, both fighters and bombers. While there's not universal agreement, many historians say that the Battle of Britain began on July 10th. Actually, significant German attacks on British targets began as early as June 18th. So, once again, here are the Luftwaffe bases in France and Belgium, and the various targets for those attackers: airfields and air manufacturing plants. And one more time, the key area for Fighter Command, Group 11s, various sectors and air bases. This is where the bulk of the fighting is going to take place. So with that rather long introduction, let's turn to what happened. The Battle of Britain lacks any clearly defined starting and ending points, as I've suggested, as it lasted over many weeks. But historians have identified 5 distinct phases where the nature of the fighting shifted significantly. Keeping in mind what I said a moment ago about some German air attacks taking place as early as mid-June, phase 1 is said to have begun on July 10th, 1940. The Luftwaffe's first target was British shipping around the south coast, along with ports in the same area. Britain tended to move a large quantity of goods in this area by ship, and London was, of course, a major port for all of Britain. But slow-moving ships were vulnerable to air attack, especially from those dive bombers, the Ju-87s. During this first phase, which lasted, as you can see, a little over a month, about 40,000 tons of British shipping was sunk. But this period proved to be something of a learning experience for the air defense system Britain had, especially for group controllers getting better at using all of the information flowing into them to respond to these initial attacks. Here are some photographs of first the German planes flying in at very low level, and of course from the front, I'm not sure which one, but one of the German bombers with its machine gun to protect to the front on its way to attack British ships. I suspect this is the Solent around Southampton and Portsmouth, but I'm not sure of that. The Germans called this first phase the Kanalkampf, or the Channel Battle. As you will see, neither side suffered major losses during this phase, which lasted until about August 8th. Indeed, the RAF grew stronger while it proceeded, as it was able to add over 100 fighters and 200 pilots from June 30th to August 3rd, 1940. But shipping losses compelled the British to prohibit large merchant ships from using the English Channel, and the Royal Navy ceased using Dover as a base at the end of July. The absence of friendly ships proved problematic for RAF pilots who were downed over the channel, as Fighter Command had been expecting they would be picked up by passing ships and had not made many other arrangements to rescue them, in contrast to the German efforts. But it quickly became apparent to Luftwaffe pilots and crew that this wasn't going to be a walkover. German losses were more than double those of Britain, and British pilots soon discovered the vulnerability of the Ju-87 dive bomber, which eventually, as I mentioned, was withdrawn for use in the air combat to be used, hopefully, from the Germans' perspective later in support of the German army once the invasion actually took place. But all in all, the intensity of the combat during this first phase was relatively mild. Goering and Hitler still had some hopes that Britain would come around to the idea of negotiations. I want to play you at this point a fascinating little tape of a BBC broadcast of an air combat over Dover, around Dover in the English Channel. Let me get to the right track here. This is about 7 minutes long, and I'll tell you a little story about it when it's done. I hope you can hear this. Jen, if it's not hearable, would you let me know, please?
Will do.
Oops, wrong one. Play.
Now the Germans are dive bombing a convoy out into sea. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 German dive bombers, Junkers 87s. There's one going down.
I can hear it okay.
You can hear it?
I can hear it.
Oh, missed the ships. He hasn't hit a single ship. There are about 10 ships in the convoy, but he hasn't hit a single one. And there you can hear anti-aircraft going at him now. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 German machines dive bombing the British convoy, which is just out to sea in the channel. I can't see anything. No, we thought he got a German one had been got then, but now the British fighters are coming up. Here they come in absolute steep dive. You can see their bombs actually leave the machines and come into the water. You can hear our own guns going like anything now. I'm looking around now. I can hear machine gun fire, but I can't see our Spitfires. There must be somewhere there. Oh, here's one coming down now. There's one coming down in flames. There's somebody's hit a German, and he's coming down with a long streak, coming down completely out of control, a long streak of smoke. Our man's bailed out by parachute. The pilot's bailed out by parachute. He's a Junkers 87, and he's going slap into the sea, and there he goes, smash! Terrific tumble of water, and there was a Junkers 87. There was only one man got out by parachute, so presumably there was only a crew of one in it. Now then, there's a terrific mix-up now over the channel. It's impossible to tell which are our machines and which are the Germans. There's one definitely down in this battle, and there's a fight going on. There's a fight going on. You can hear the little rattles of machine gun bullets. That was a bomb, you may imagine. Here comes, there's one Spitfire. There's a little burst. There's another bomb dropping. Yes, it's dropped. Oh, they missed the convoy. No, they haven't hit the convoy in all this. The sky is absolutely patterned now with bursts of anti-aircraft fire, and the sea is covered with smoke where the bombs have burst. But as far as I can see, there's not one single ship hit. And there is definitely one German machine down. And looking across the sea now, I can see the little white dot of parachute as the German pilot is floating down towards the spot where his machine crashed with such a big fountain of water about 2 minutes ago. Well, now everything is peaceful again for the moment. The Germans, who came over in about 20 dive bombers, delivered their attack on the convoy, and I think they've made off as quickly as they came. Oh yes, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Germans tearing back towards France now for all they can go. And here are our Spitfires coming after them. There's going to be a big fight, I think, out there, but it will be too far away for us to see. Of course, there are lots more German machines up there. Can you see? Can you see, Phil? Yes, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on top layer. 1, 2, 3. There's 2 layers of German machines. They were all, I think, I couldn't swear to it, but they were all, I think, Junkers 87. Where are 2 more parachuters? No, I think that's Seagulls. Yes. You can hear the anti-aircraft batteries still going. Well, that was a really hot little engagement while it lasted. No damage done except for the Germans, who lost 1 machine, and the German pilot is still on the end of his parachute, so appreciably nearer the sea than he was. I can see no boat going up to pick him up. So he'll probably have a long swim ashore.
Yeah.
But that was a very unsuccessful attack on the convoy, I must say. But well, there's another fight going on way up now. I say about 20, 25,000, even 30,000 feet above our heads, and we can't see a thing of it. The anti-aircraft guns have just put up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bursts, but I can't see the aeroplanes. There we go again. What? Well, yes, oh, we've just hit a Messerschmitt. Oh, that was beautiful. He's coming right down now. I think definitely that burst got him. Down, yes, he's come down. He's come down. You hear those cries. He's finished. Oh, he's coming down like a rocket now. Absolute seat dive. Let's move around so I can watch him a bit more. Here he comes. Down in the seat dive. And Messerschmitt looking for the parachute, and it's looking for the... No, the pilot's not getting out of that one. Being followed down. What, there are 2 more Messerschmitts up there. I think they're all right. No, that man is finished. I think he's come down from about 10,000 or 20,000 feet to about 2,000 feet, and he's going straight down. He's not stopping. I think that's another German machine that's definitely put paid. So, yeah, we don't think we'd like to see him crash because he's going to the top of a bank of stars. He's smoking now. I can see smoke, and although we can't count him a definite victory, so we can't see him crash. He's gone down behind the hill. He looks certainly out of control. Now we're looking up the anti-aircraft gun. No, there's a Messerschmitt. I don't know whether he's down or whether he's trying to get out of the anti-aircraft, which are giving him a very hard time. No, there's a Spitfire. There are about 4 fighters up there, and I don't know what they're doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fighters fighting right over our head now. There's one coming right down on the tail of what I think is the Messerschmitt. I think the Spitfire behind him. Oh, down, they've turned away. I can't see. Look. Where's one crashing? No, I think he's pulled out. And there's you can't watch these fights very coherently for long. You just see about 4 swirling machines. You hear a little burst of machine gun, and the time you picked up the machines, they've gone. There are 1, 2, 3. Oh, look, there's a dogfight going up there. There are 4, 5, 6 machines wheeling and turning around. Now, look at the machine guns going. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now there's something coming right down on the tail of another. They're being chased home, and how they're being chased home. There are 3 Spitfires chasing 3 Messerschmitts now. Oh boy, look at them going, and look how the Messerschmitt. Hey, that is really grand. And there's a Spitfire just behind the first 2. He'll get them. Oh yes. Oh boy, I've never seen anything so good as this. The RAF fighters have really got these boys paid. Our machine is catching up the Messerschmitt now. It's catching it up. It's got the legs on it, you know. Now, right in the sight. Now, go on, George. You've got him. No, the distance is a bit deceptive from here. You can't tell. But I think something definitely is going to happen to that first Messerschmitt. Yes. Just a moment. I think I would like to be in that first Messerschmitt. I think he's got him, yes. Machine guns are going like anything. There's no fight. I'm afraid. No, they chased them right up to sea, and I can't see now, but the odds were certainly on that first Messerschmitt catching it. Yes. Where? Where? I can't see them at all. Oh, yes, I see, yes. Has he got him down? I can't see. Yes, he's pulled away from him. Yes, I think that first Messerschmitt has been crashed on the coast of France, all right.
Well, that was a long description. I need to tell you a little story about this recording. It was done by a man named Charles Gardner. Later in the war, he became a RAF pilot, actually, flying planes, searching for German submarines over the Atlantic Ocean. He got this broadcast through the BBC censors, and it was broadcast. And there was a fair amount of criticism of him for turning the dirty business of war into a commentary on what could have been considered a football game. But a lot of people liked it, and they thought it was certainly cheerful to them to hear the combat going on in this description. It appears that that first plane that he was describing, where there was one person parachuting out, may have in fact been a British fighter plane, because the Junkers 87 actually had two crew. It's not entirely clear. There were a German plane shot down during the course of this mission. Anyway, I thought you might enjoy that. That's the kind of stuff that was going on. And the picture you see here are what those dive bombers were trying to do to the shipping in the English Channel. At the end of phase one, these were the losses. Relatively small for the length of time involved. You'll notice a significant number of losses as a result of accident. This was not a safe occupation, flying fighter planes or bombers. I need to add also, of course, that these rates I'm giving you, these numbers, are not necessarily as precise as they might appear. A lot of historians have looked through a lot of records and have been unable to agree on the precise numbers of losses on both sides. These numbers are approximately right. Of course, they don't include damaged aircraft either. German planes would frequently come back to base, as would British fighters, with severe damage, and in some cases would be unable to be repaired. Well, the second phase began around August 8th and ran through the 23rd. When it became clear that Britain wasn't interested in giving up, Goering intensified Luftwaffe attacks during this second phase. He believed it would only take 4 concentrated days of attacks to reduce the RAF to impotence. This was to begin with a massive initial assault called Eagle attack, Adlerangriff in German. This occurred on August 13th, although the German attacks that day were disorganized due to some communications failures. Some of the attacks the Germans made on British airfields were based on faulty intelligence, as they bombed either bomber command or coastal command bases, believing them to be fighter command bases. Adlerangriff was a smashing success so far as the Germans were concerned. 134 RAF planes shot down and 8 RAF bases destroyed. But in reality, only 13 RAF fighters had lost, and of those, 6 of the pilots were saved, and no bases were knocked out. And indeed, the Germans themselves lost 45 planes on that same day. These estimates for Adlerangriff are a good example of just how bad German intelligence estimates were during the entire Battle of Britain. Now, during this phase, the Luftwaffe struck at some airfields and also radar stations. But in the latter case, the radar stations, they only made one serious attack, August 12th, that actually did any serious damage, one of the stations being knocked out for several days. Now, you may recall me asking you last week to notice the lattice work construction of these radar stations. I did that because actually that construction made it very difficult for them to be destroyed with a bomb, as the blast from a bomb would largely pass through the lattice work of a tower without damaging it. Of course, the control stations and buildings next to the tower were much more vulnerable. But Goering did not understand the importance of radar stations to the British defense system, and was fooled somewhat by the fact that mobile radar could, to some extent, take the place of the knocked out permanent stations. I should add here that there were some German air leaders who commented that they didn't really care if the radar stations worked, because if they did, they would bring RAF planes to the German planes, where, of course, the hope was they would be knocked out and shot down, which is the goal of the whole attack. Goering concluded that the bombing of radar stations was ineffective, and therefore ordered that they no longer be attacked on August 15th. This proved to be a huge tactical error for the Luftwaffe. Virtually all of the Battle of Britain took place in the southeast part of England, closest to the Luftwaffe bases in France and Belgium. but there were significant Luftwaffe forces in Norway and Denmark. On August 15th, Luftwaffe 5, based in Denmark and Norway, attacked northern England and Scotland, hoping to find only weak defenses and fighter command focused on southeast England. They ran into Fighter Command Group 13 and got hammered, losing 22 bombers and Me-110s, the loss of only one RAF plane. Not surprisingly, this was their only appearance of the entire Battle of Britain. The absence of the 109 escorts, who couldn't operate effectively from Scandinavian bases that are just too far away, aided the British response considerably in this response to this attack. Again, I need to add that German intelligence performed badly, consistently overestimating RAF losses. For example, they estimated by August 16th that the RAF was down to only 300 fighters. Actually, the number was 700. Some of the heaviest fighting took place during this phase. For example, on August 15th, 75 German planes and 34 British planes were lost. And on the 18th, 71 German and 27 British. Indeed, August 18th alone was considered to be the hardest day. And indeed, there was a book entitled just that, The Hardest Day, which covered just the events, the air attacks and responses and so forth on that one day. You can sort of see why that, given the results of that day, why a book concentrating on just that one day would be written. Total losses began to mount on both sides. In just 16 days of the second phase, 178 and 342 German aircraft were lost in combat. Of course, a significant number of RAF pilots parachuted to safety. I want to give you one other track from the CD I have. This is considerably shorter, but I think you'll find it entertaining. This is, hit the screen here. This is John William Charles Simpson, JWC Simpson. He was a pilot who survived the war, but who died unfortunately in 1949 at the age of 36. This is his brief story. It's about 3.5 minutes, I think. Check that, make sure I'm telling the truth here. Yeah, about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Let me find the track for you, and you can listen to this. This is, I think, just charming.
I had my first parachute descent the other day during a battle off the south coast. I'd had the pleasure of sending 2 Messerschmitts into the sea, and then 2 others attacked me. I twisted and turned, but they were too accurate. I could hear the deafening thud of their bullets. Pieces of my aircraft seemed to be flying off in all directions. My engine was damaged, and I couldn't climb back to the cloud where I might have lost them. Then came a cold, stinging pain in my left foot. One of their bullets had found its mark, but it didn't hurt. I was about to dive to the sea and make my escape low down when the control column became useless in my hand. Black smoke poured into the cockpit and I couldn't see. I knew that the time had come for me to depart. Everything after this was perfectly calm. I was at about 10,000 feet, but some miles out to sea. I lifted my seat and undid my straps and opened the hood. The wind became my ally, and a hand, actually the slipstream catching under my helmet, seemed to lift me out of the cockpit. It was a pleasant sensation. I was in midair, floating down so peacefully in the cool breeze. I had to remind myself to pull my ripcord and open my parachute. When the first jerk was over, I swung like a pendulum. This was not so pleasant, but I soon settled down, and I was able to enjoy a full view of the world below, the beach some miles away with soldiers, and the long lines of villas in a coastal town. There was no sensation of speed. The ripples on the water became bigger, and the soldiers became nearer. I had 1 minute of anxiety as I floated down. One of the Messerschmitts appeared. The pilot circled round me. and I was just a little alarmed. Would he shoot? Well, he didn't. He behaved quite well. He opened his hood, waved to me, and then dived towards the sea and made off towards France. The wind was still friendly. It was carrying me in towards the beach. I took out my cigarettes and lit one with my lighter without any difficulty. Ages seemed to pass. I threw away the cigarette as I came nearer and nearer to the coast. I could hear the all clear sirens, and passing over the houses on the seafront, I could see the people coming out of their shelters. People looking up at me. I descended to about 1,000 feet. I began to sway a little, and I could hear my parachute flapping, like the sound of a sail in a small boat. The soldiers' faces were quite clear, but I must have looked English, even at 1,000 feet, which was comforting. For the first time since the enemy pilots circled around me, I became anxious. Was I to end my escapade by being banged against a seaside villa? It didn't seem possible that I could reach the fields beyond. Well, the journey ended in a cucumber frame, after I'd pushed myself free of a house with my foot. It was the first time I'd ever bailed out, and really one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life.
One of the most enjoyable experiences of my life. I had the pleasure a while back of teaching a class on the Battle of Britain to some folks in Canaan, Connecticut. We used to live there in that area. And I played that tape for them. And one of the women in the class made the comment that, having heard this, she said, "That's why there will always be an England." I must say, I have to agree. To be sure, the Luftwaffe is suffering worse from a strict numerical perspective. But the initial disparity between the two sides means the British are simply losing too many planes, and in particular, pilots. I should add here that Fighter Command has figured out that it made sense to give its fighter planes different roles to play. The faster and somewhat more agile Spitfire to take on the Me-109s, while the more numerous Hurricanes go after the German bombers. Of course, this division of labor isn't always possible. And there's also a fiery debate going on within Fighter Command between 11 Group Leader Keith Park and 12 Group Leader Trafford Lee Mallory over British fighter tactics. Lee Mallory's group is just north of Park's, which was seeing most of the action. Lee Mallory wanted to use a so-called big wing of Spitfires and Hurricanes to send up anywhere from 36 to 60 of them at a time, 3 to 5 squadrons in all, to plow into a German formation at one time, believing that such a large group would cause devastating losses to the Germans and might have an impact on their morale. The problem was that it took time to get such a large number of planes in the air and organized, so much so that they would not always be able to hit the German planes before they had finished their bombing runs. Park insisted that he didn't have the luxury of waiting, as the Luftwaffe would be over British airspace, his space, the 11 Group, so quickly. He opted for single squadron attacks, generally, which often meant the RAF was seriously outnumbered in such encounters. But at least they were mixing it up with the advancing Germans and thereby messing up their bombing. Park also needed 12 Group to be available to defend 11 Group's airfields after 11 Group squadrons had left for interception missions elsewhere. The big wing approach left those critical airfields undefended in some cases to serious German attacks. The debate was never fully concluded during the Battle of Britain, although post-war analysis generally found Park's approach to be the only sensible one given the dire circumstances that Fighter Command faced during the Battle of Britain. Now we turn to the third phase, from August 24th to September 6th, relatively short, as you can see. Now, the whole situation for the RAF seemed close to collapse. The Luftwaffe was focusing mostly on fighter command airfields in the southeast part of Britain, which became known as Hellfire Corner. Slowly but surely, these bases were being ground down with repeated attacks. The RAF was able to intercept many of them, but inevitably German bombers got through and destroyed vital equipment and killed or wounded critical ground personnel. Some of the 11 group sector control stations, which as I mentioned last week, were used to control the interception of oncoming German planes, were sited too close to airfields and therefore themselves were knocked out. Sector controllers could switch their operations to other bases within the sector, but obviously that took time to set up. On August 24th, the air base at Manson, which is located in the extreme eastern part of the 11 group area, was abandoned. It was the only airfield abandoned by the RAF during the battle. Show you a few pictures of what was going on with these attacks on British air bases. This is a picture from a low-level German bomber. I want you to notice dead center of the picture is a Spitfire in a revetment. These were constructed, as I mentioned last week, to prevent these planes that might be destroyed from causing the destruction of nearby other fighter planes. This is Middle Wallop Air Base. I love British names. Middle Wallop. Some of the damage. You can see that the hangar building here had its roof completely destroyed. And of course, bombs would drop on the airfield runways and other areas. You can see how big this one is. Needs to be repaired. The interior of that same, I believe it's the same hangar. Luftwaffe intelligence suggested that as this third phase was proceeding, that the RAF was beginning to falter, and therefore going after the airfields in southeastern England would accelerate that process. And indeed, this seemed to be the case. Airfields were being effectively and regularly pounded. By September 1st, the RAF had lost 11 of its 46 squadron commanders and 39 of its 76 flight commanders, the guys just below on the organizational chart. All of these were experienced pilots. Dowding was getting desperate, scrambling for other branches of the RAF to supply pilots, Army liaison pilots, guys who flew those ineffective ferry battle bombers. And indeed, even the Royal Navy was asked to contribute pilots, and it did. The RAF was 200 or more pilots below what it was supposed to have. Of course, replacements came in at about 50 pilots per week, but they were green, inexperienced, and way too many of them died from their lack of experience, sometimes in their very first mission. Indeed, post-war studies indicated that if you could just get to 2 or 3 missions without being killed, your chances of survival rose greatly. And of course, by this time, everybody on both sides is dead tired. British flyers were putting up 4 and 5 sorties or flights a day, sometimes even more. Throughout the battle, RAF squadrons are sometimes taking on German planes at ridiculous odds, 10 to 1. Radar and observer corps information got the RAF to those German planes, but of course it took air-to-air combat to bring them down. This is a picture of Brian Sandy Lane, the squadron commander with the RAF. This photo was taken before the intense combat of his third phase. Look at him now. Look at those eyes and his face. This young man is 23 years old. He survived the Battle of Britain, but sadly was killed in action near the end of 1942. This is a little plaque on his childhood home. German air crew, who were very confident, understandably so, at the beginning of the Battle of Britain, became increasingly dismissive of German intelligence claims that the British were down to their last few planes. German fighter pilots were ordered to fly closer to the bombers, which robbed them of their ability to go after the RAF fighters. Luftwaffe frustration mounted while its morale dropped. Goering, on his part, is simply having too much fun on his palatial estate in Germany to make serious decisions about Luftwaffe strategy. In the meantime, the German Navy, very reluctantly, due to their fear that they couldn't take on the Royal Navy, and the Army were putting together the Sea Lion invasion plans. Barges, invasion barges, were gathered from all over Europe. But these were never built for the open sea. And many had no engines, which would mean they would have to be towed at very slow speeds across the channel. During this third phase, British losses grew closer to those of the Luftwaffe. In those 14 days until September 6th, the RAF lost 264 planes, the Germans 298. Put simply, Dowding was losing the battle of attrition. The air defense system was failing due to the lack of skilled pilots and airfield damage. Sector stations built too close to those airfields were getting clobbered as well, making fighter control difficult. Post office personnel were barely able to keep up with ravaged communication lines. But salvation for the RAF was at hand. Throughout the battle, both sides delivered night bombing attacks on each other. Night bomber crews on both sides were told to hit only military targets. Indeed, German night bombers were forbidden by Hitler to bomb London altogether. But Murphy's Law prevailed, and on the night of August 24th, several German planes unintentionally dropped bombs on London. Little damage was affected. The RAF struck back immediately, bombing Berlin that very next evening, and indeed 3 more nights later that same week. Some historians have suggested that these British raids, so enraged Hitler that he ordered the commencement of the bombing of London. And while there certainly was the desire for revenge, the truth about why the Luftwaffe changed target priorities is a bit more complicated. German intelligence once again had incorrectly concluded that the RAF was just about done. In fact, those airfields in southeastern England were supposedly no longer operational, and the RAF was withholding its fighters from further combat in relatively undamaged airfields to the north of London. To complete the job, the Luftwaffe had to attack a target that the British could not leave undefended. What better choice than London? London was the capital of the British Empire and the center of the British economy, with over 7 million inhabitants. Serious civilian casualties might force the British government to surrender. Well, now we enter the fourth phase, September 7th through the 30th. London becomes the primary target, day and night, for the rest of the month. Civilian casualties from the bombing mount precipitously. 400 plus are killed every day. The RAF has too few anti-aircraft guns, and they are very ineffective at downing German planes. But at least their firing improves civilian morale. RAF anti-aircraft guns fired 260,000 rounds during September alone. And I think the number was that in the course of all that, they shot down 7 planes. This picture shows the London docks burning ferociously on September 7th, 1940, from the first day of the German assault on the capital. Early attacks on London focused on the low-income working class areas in the east end of London, near the docks. Germans had some hopes that attacking the poorer sections of the city might ignite some sort of class warfare in Britain. But 1940 bombing, even during the daytime, is an inexact science. On September 10th, and then again more seriously, on September 13th, German bombers hit Buckingham Palace, injuring palace staff and eventually one of them dying. The king and the queen were in the building at the time, only 80 yards from one of those bombs. There was no outbreak of class warfare. The queen commented to a British policeman afterwards, a famous quotation, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I could look the East End in the face." Later, rejecting calls from the royal family to leave Britain altogether, she said in a radio broadcast, "The children will not leave unless I do. I shall not leave unless their father does, and the king will not leave the country in any circumstances whatever." All of this was great for British morale. London civilians hold on, indeed for months to come, despite what would be eventually 40,000 deaths from German bombing attacks on London alone. Beginning on September 7th, London was bombed day or night for 57 straight days. This is the iconic photograph of St. Paul's Cathedral, taken during a massive German attack on December 29th, 1940, the same night that President Roosevelt gave his famous Arsenal of Democracy speech on our side of the Atlantic. The respite to RAF operations was heaven sent. Airfields are repaired. Aircraft manufacturing is now left alone. And the Me-109s, as I mentioned, have fuel only enough to operate over London for about 10 minutes before they have to return to base. This gives RAF fighters the chance to shoot down more bombers. And indeed, the numbers show it. From September 7th until the end of the month, when the Germans ceased large daylight bombing raids altogether, the RAF loses 243 planes in combat, but in comparison to phase 3, the German Luftwaffe losses are much larger, 378 planes. You may recall seeing this page, this newspaper front page last week. The headline is wrong. German losses that day were only 56 planes versus 26 for the RAF on that particular day, or the day before, September 15th. Indeed, this wasn't even the worst day for the Germans during the Battle of Britain. But this error was of really no importance. German planes were going down in large numbers, losses that were unsustainable in the medium to long term. On September 15th, 1940, the day this newspaper is reporting on, the Germans mounted one last all-out effort to knock out the RAF. Hitler had already postponed the invasion once, hoping that the Luftwaffe would fulfill the key predicate of destroying the RAF. As autumn approached, there were only a few days left to launch the invasion. But the RAF demonstrated convincingly on that day that it was far from defeated. While the British didn't know it at the time, of course, the invasion was called off 2 days later, Hitler postponing it officially until spring of 1941. And of course, that invasion never happened then. Britain today celebrates September 15th as Battle of Britain Day. We enter the fifth phase, arguably the last one. And I say approximately because it sort of petered out as time went on after October 31st. Once again, the Luftwaffe changes its approach. Now, bombing is done almost exclusively by Me-109s and 110s, acting as fighter bombers, while the twin-engined HE-111s, the Dornier 17s, and the Ju-88s are withdrawn from further major daylight combat. They're now employed, of course, in night bombing, something the RAF has no real defense against. Its fighters are not set up for flying at night. Engine exhaust flames render pilots unable to see in the dark, and radar at this point is too primitive for use in aircraft anyway. But as you can imagine, being a fighter, the Me-109 isn't able to carry a very large bomb load, certainly nothing like the Luftwaffe's twin-engine planes. Its radius of operations is small as well due to its limited range. The RAF has a difficult time with these raids because they're at high altitudes where radar is less effective and the observer corps can hardly see at all. Losses for this period are reduced. 130 planes for the British, 260 for the Luftwaffe. During the war, both sides publicly announced enemy losses far larger than reality. The Luftwaffe claimed over 3,000 British planes shot down. The real number was about 915. The RAF maintained the German losses to be 2,700, when in reality they were a little over 1,700. And I'm sad to tell you that in what was seen by many at the time to be a disgraceful and ungrateful act, Hugh Dowding was fired as head of fighter command in November of 1940. The victim of the big wing controversy between Park and Lee Mallory, which he was unable or unwilling to resolve during the Battle of Britain. And maybe more importantly, the RAF's inability to deal effectively with the German nighttime bombing blitz. Indeed, London and other British cities are savaged by the blitz, as the German night bombing campaign became to be known, throughout the fall and winter and early spring of 1940, 1941. This picture is of the Coventry Cathedral, smashed in the catastrophic raid on November 14th, 1940, that killed almost 500 people and damaged or destroyed over 40,000 homes in a city of less than 250,000. But in May of 1941, the Blitz ended. The bulk of the Luftwaffe facing Britain was moved east to prepare for, of course, the German attack on the Soviet Union. Fighter Command had won the Battle of Britain. There was always the risk, of course, that the return of good weather in the spring of 1941 would bring an invasion. The British simply didn't know. But of course, by then, the British Army would have been in a much better position to resist it. Equipment, manpower, all being restored after the debacle at Dunkirk. And of course, in any case, Hitler's throw of the dice in the Soviet Union eliminated that threat altogether. With the US getting into the war in December of 41, the UK ultimately becomes a gigantic arms depot, air base location, and troops barracks in 1942 to 1944, and eventually the jumping off point for the Normandy invasion in June of 1944. But let us suppose that Fighter Command was in fact destroyed. What would have been the consequences? Now, I got to tell you, this is a subject of immense speculation. There have been books written about, what would have happened had the invasion taken place. Books on both sides, British as well as German. Well, let me speculate for a little bit. Had Fighter Command lost, Britain may well have been invaded, or at least would have reached some sort of an accommodation with Hitler, which would have enabled him to put almost all of his forces into the assault on the Soviet Union, instead of obviously leaving some behind to prevent any kind of British raids onto the continent. And if the Soviet Union collapses, then Germany will reign supreme in Europe. And indeed, the USA may never get into the war. Well, another question. Assume that Fighter Command loses. Would Sea Lion, the invasion, ever have actually taken place? Some people say probably not. But even if the Churchill government resists making peace with Germany, an RAF Fighter Command defeat would likely have led to a continued German bombing campaign day and night that might have worn down British morale to the point of surrender or negotiations, Churchill being fired, which of course, again, would have freed up Hitler to attack the Soviet Union. The RAF win was a big morale boost that enabled the British public, especially in London, to put up with the Blitz. And winning the battle also had its impact on the US, the United States. It appeared to the American public that Britain was resilient and resolute. Joe Kennedy, President Kennedy's father, who was the American ambassador to the UK, was a pessimist about Britain surviving. But the Battle of Britain convinced Roosevelt that maybe things weren't so bad. And of course, the continued bombing of London and elsewhere created much sympathy in the US public, which enabled Britain to make some helpful deals with the US later on in 1940 and 41. Beyond the scope of this to discuss, but for example, the destroyers for air bases deal of late 1940 as an example. I can't finish this without a couple more slides, and then we can get to some conversations perhaps. These two gentlemen represent, in my opinion, one of the ultimate ironies, perhaps even stupidities of war. Two well-dressed gentlemen out enjoying a day of hunting with each other. Who are they, you may ask? And more to the point, why am I showing you these pictures of them, this picture of them? Well, as it turns out, 30 years earlier, they were trying not to kill a few birds in a forest, but rather each other. You have on the left the Luftwaffe fighter pilot, ace, and eventually Luftwaffe general, Adolf Galan, and RAF fighter command pilot, Robert Sanford Tuck, on the right. After the war, they became fast friends. Well, if you're friends after the war, why would you want to kill each other during the war? I can't answer that. Nobody can answer it. Anyway, that's it. That's the story of the Battle of Britain, a momentous, in my opinion, event in the history of the world. And had it gone differently, we might be living in a very different world. So I got 12 minutes before it's 7 o'clock here and 8 o'clock where you guys are. Open to questions. Jen, if you want to see what's out there and have people fire away.
Sure. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have anything in the chat box at the moment. So
Okay.
if people want to unmute to ask a question, go right ahead.
Hi, I have a quick question, Greg. It's not really about tonight's material. It's about last week's material. I was sort of surprised to see that there were so many women involved on the British side so early in the war. It seems to me like in the US that happened later in the war after we started losing soldiers. So I was curious if that was a policy or those pictures were actually later in the war.
Well, certainly the British started using women earlier than we did. Of course, we got in the war 2.5 years after the war
Right.
started. But it was fairly early. I don't know exactly when the RAF Observer Corps folks included women. I do know that the radar stations had women operating them fairly early. And I think I mentioned the ferrying of newly built aircraft from factories to bases. That was going on in 1941. I mentioned Amy Johnson, who was the Australian woman who was sort of an Australian equivalent to Amelia Earhart. She was killed, I think, in November of 41 in the course of carrying or flying a plane from a manufacturing base. There's no question that, at the beginning of the war, if you looked at 1939, the role of women in the British military was very, very limited. But the British couldn't afford to waste them. And I think there was some early thinking that we need to get them more involved. Mm-hmm. You saw the pictures of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force women operating the croupier sticks and the blocks on those tables. That was 1940. Again, they started off using men, but women were used. And I think there was a sense that women did it better than men did. They were less rattled, less likely to get, they were able to do it more calmly, which of course is important to doing it well. I hope that helps.
Definitely, thank you.
I have a question. Are you familiar with this movie called Castles in the Sky, which is about Robert Watson and how he put together and developed the radar system?
To tell you the truth, no. The Castles in the Sky? Is it?
Oh, yeah.
It's a movie?
Yes. It's about 5 or 6 years old. It stars Eddie Izzard, and it's a great story. Sure. I mean, it's all about, half the stuff that you spoke about, which is and one of the interesting things is apparently all these guys that he was working with on the technology were weathermen. And I'm wondering, is that true as far as you know, that they were meteorologists as opposed to engineers or whatever?
I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
It could well be.
I do recommend it. I do recommend it. It's a good film.
Okay. Have any of you, I have not seen this movie, but I'm wondering, there's a movie that was made during the war with David Niven playing the part of Reginald Mitchell, the guy who was the chief initial designer of the Spitfire. Oh, I can't think of what it's called now. Anyway, it's a movie I'd like to see it. It's supposed to be pretty good. And of course, the one I mentioned at the beginning of this program, the Battle of Britain. Okay, other questions?
Greg, we do have one in the chat box right now from Charles. Any thoughts on why Hitler retained Goering as head of the Luftwaffe after the war when Goering reportedly failed to meet Hitler's expectations?
That's an excellent question. Hitler, let me back up. Goering was, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, a fighter pilot during World War I. A very successful one, I should add. He took over von Richthofen's squadron after the Red Baron was killed in 1918. But he was also a very important member of the very senior Nazi hierarchy. He was in charge of I think it was called the 4-year plan or the 5-year plan, as the economic development of the military of Germany during the 1930s. I'm guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that Hitler knew full well that Goering was less than ideal, but he didn't really have an alternative. There wasn't anybody out there that could be picked. And I think Hitler was really focused more on ground warfare than on air warfare. The German Luftwaffe was, during the war, almost exclusively a tactical weapon to support the army on the ground. For example, to the best of my knowledge, there was almost no bombing of Soviet factories. Of course, they'd been moved by Stalin at the beginning of the war to beyond the Urals, and had that British general, that German general who had died in the 1930s, had his way, they would have had long-range bombers to do that. It was meant to be an adjunct to the army, and the army was doing okay. And then it was too late to do anything about it. And, Goering was getting increasingly addicted to morphine, getting fatter, paying less attention to his duties and more attention to stealing art from the French, some of which you know the stories about. He should have been fired, but I don't think Hitler had a replacement for him.
Very interesting. Thank you. And we have a comment. The David Niven movie was the first of a few in 19.
That's it. The first of the few. Thank you. I will try to find that one.
Plus A. This was plus A.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you remember, you weren't around to see it. I remember when it played in American theaters, a film called A Yank in the RAF.
Tyrone Power?
I think it might have starred Errol Flynn.
Okay.
Maybe.
You recall that?
I've never seen it. I know of it.
Uh-huh, okay.
Another one I should see. I'm learning a lot here.
What do you think?
He says he's learning a lot. Not as much as we're learning.
Thank you.
By the way, I should add that the Nazis seemed to take particular zeal in bombing the East London docks because that was an area where there was a large Jewish working class population.
Ah, that makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
One more comment, helping with the movie situation. Tim lets us know that the Battle of Britain film is available for free with ads on YouTube.
Oh, great. Well, I'm going to look that up. I have a relatively new computer, which has got good graphics, and I can watch it on that. I got to tell you, though, that if you want to see, putting aside the fact that they're trying to kill each other, the beauty of these planes flying around in the sky. In 1969, the producers of that movie gathered up a whole, I'm sure some substantial number, if not the majority, of surviving air machines from the time of the Battle of Britain to be used in the movie. Some of the German planes were built in Spain following the war, so they were available. And of course, there were Spitfires and Hurricanes still around. It's a gorgeous thing to see, the flying. Again, if you can put aside the fact that they're after each other's lives, which is sort of sad.
Was there much popular culture about this, such as the songs that people sang?
I don't know.
I have a good memory of a song that was popular in the United States, because it had nothing to do with the Battle of Britain, which was Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer.
Sure, sure. It's interesting. I did a series for the local Ollie Osher Lifelong Learning Institute program back where I used to live on World War I, and there's a lot of music in World War I.
Mhm. Yes.
Less so, I think, in World War II. Anyway, I know I have not actually studied that subject, but it's an interesting one, the cultural response.
One of the great British popular singers of World War II just died a couple of years ago, Vera Lynn.
Vera Lynn, yeah. She was like 103 or so.
Yeah, she was.
One other thing I have not talked about in this, and if you guys don't mind, I'll take it in a minute. I was going to show you a picture of a guy named Richard Hillary, who died in 1943. And there's one of the tracks on this CD that I have. I can show you this, I think. Oh, no, I guess you can't see it. Here you are. Maybe you can see this. It's a CD of various radio recordings. That's where I got the things you just listened to. Hillary was, and the track describes this, was in a fighter plane that got hit. And unlike Mr. Simpson, he was not able to get out of the cockpit before being severely burned. And indeed, a lot of RAF pilots suffered horrible burn injuries to their body as well as to their face, Hillary being included. There was a man, a surgeon by the name of Archibald McIndoe, I think I'm saying his name right, who developed some radically new plastic surgery methods to deal with these injuries and these disfigurements. And eventually, the men he worked on to improve their appearance, quite frankly, that was what the goal was, formed sort of a little informal club called the Guinea Pig Club, because it was all new stuff and they were guinea pigs. Hillary was one of them. He and others. All of these guys, of course, are now gone. But they used to have reunions and see each other. And I got to tell you, McIndoe's work on them was just remarkable. How well he was able to take just terrible wounds and at least give them some semblance of looking, forgive the word, normal to their families and their friends.
Probably a whole other interesting topic, sort of the medical innovations.
Oh yeah, they, quite honestly, the French and the British did the same thing. I think, although they didn't deal with the same kinds of wounds in World War I. And one of my presentations, I talk a little bit about that. Although sadly, in some cases, if you got injured with a shell or a rifle bullet or whatever on your face, the only solution that the doctors back then came up with was a mask, and you'd wear it in public so the children wouldn't scream in terror when they saw you on the street, I guess. So war is a terrible thing. I'm not going to pontificate about that. Well, we're at 7 o'clock. I appreciate your attention to this. I hope you've enjoyed it. There are lots of books about the Battle of Britain. I didn't bother to come up with a reading list. Just do a Google search. You can find dozens of them. Len Dayton, who's a famous British writer, has written one. Dempster and Hall, I think, did another one. They're out there. I'm sure the Stephentown Library can get them for you if they don't already have them. So it's a fascinating subject. And they're still looking at it and they're still studying it. It will be for many more years, I suspect.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful, really wonderful.
Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Good
you
luck
so
to you
much.
all. And I enjoyed doing this.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and the great
Thank you.
presentations. Thank you, Greg.
Okay. All right.
Thank you everyone for who attended. Hopefully we'll have some more similar ones in the future.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Janet, thank you.
Yeah. On the wing and prayer.